Welcome, my scouting friends. I am Chief Laudable of the South Teton region. I wish to give you the legend of the Tetons. Many years ago, the nation of the Tetons, composed of many tribes of Indians living from the great lands westward on the plains. They were a great group of different tribes that lived peacefully together, as far as tribes can be living together and yet not be together. One day, one of their sentries way to the west signaled that a foreign Indian, an Indian he had never seen before from a different tribe, was heading eastward to the nation of the Teton, the Sioux, the Mandala, the Crows, and the Blackfeet, and others who were living in various parts of the country. Another scout signaled the same thing, that an Indian from the west was coming eastward. Finally, this Indian came to the great teepees of the great chiefs of the nation, that of Chief Yellow Bear. He fell to the ground exhausted. Sometime later, when he was revived, he told a story of the Indians of the mountains to the west, where he said the devil men had come upon them and were killing them off. He said that he had sent to the nation of the Tetons for his brothers, the Indians of the east, to come and help. Chief Yellow Bear summoned the warriors, the braves and the chiefs, and told them to go through the nations of the Tetons and summon the leaders to gather. In the meantime, the head chief, Chief Two Eagles, was told what was happening. He summoned all the chiefs to come quickly. Thundercloud, the medicine man, who was actually number 2 man of the nation, Big Chief, Big Dog, and Chief Hunting Teepees likewise. These 4 men ruled the entire nation of the Tetons. That night, the thundercloud was awakened because runners had gone throughout the nation. And there in his teepee door stood what was described by the Indian from the west as one of the devil men. This devil man said to him, "Do not go to the mountains. If you go to the mountains, we will kill you too." Thundercloud went to sleep and soon was awakened again by the same devil man, who gave him the same message in the same way, then disappeared. The 3rd time this happened, Thundercloud went to Two Eagles' teepee and told him what had happened. Two Eagles said, "We will go." Thundercloud knew that there was no changing the mind of this great chief. The next day, preparations were being made by the chiefs and the warriors to go to the mountains in the west. After several days, a sufficient number of braves and warriors had assembled. This group, under the leadership of Two Eagles, started westward to the mountains. The women and children were told to follow after them because they would be needed. They traveled many days. Finally, they came to the valley of the great Rocky Mountains as we know them today. A few days later, they came to a large valley with a great mountain before them to the west. They stopped at night. Thundercloud again was awakened by one of the devil people. This time the devil man did not warn them not to come, but instead he taunted them, chiding him, saying, come into the mountains and we will kill you like we have done the rest of the Indians." 3 times this happened. Thundercloud went to Two Eagles and told him what had happened. Chief Two Eagles again said, "We will go." So before dawnbreak, the great group of warriors and chiefs were assembled, and they started westward into the Great Canyon, which now is known as Devil's Canyon. As they came into the opening of the canyon, they were met by the Devil Men. They fought furiously on both sides of the canyon, the Indians knowing that the Devil Men might retreat, but go around behind the steep canyon and built a wall so the Devil Men could not retreat up the canyon to the south and west. South of the canyon, a steep precipice ledge over which no one goes. To the right or to the northwest of the very steep incline, which finally the Devil Men started to retreat up over the high ridge, which is now known as Chief Big Dog Mountain. The Devil Men were retreating. The Indians were in pursuit. Many a Devil Man, not being careful enough to get his footing, would slip and fall and roll to his death. Many Indian chiefs and warriors likewise were not cautious enough, and they too fell. Finally, the Devil Men got to the top of the crest and came over to what is now known as the South Fork of the Grand Teton Canyon, where there are 2 small exits, one especially small, down through the cliffs, a narrow passageway west wide enough for 1 person. The Devil Men that could started down through that, but there were so many of them that couldn't. So the others went west, back around the mountain to the right of the 2 escape routes. Down through this, they came into the South Fork of Teton Canyon. The Indians were in pursuit, and they followed them down both trails. Down northward to the bend was the canyon, and then west toward the West Valley below. When the Indians pursued them down to the valley, they thought they had them, but then they met something to their great surprise, for they too had been sending warrior messengers for aid from their people. The Teton Valley just seemed to be filled with warriors coming to the rescue of the Devil Men. With this great increase in Devil Men, the Indians were stopped and had to retreat back up the canyon. And finally, several miles from the mouth of the canyon, about 1.5 miles down the canyon, the last Indians made their stand. There were warriors who were killed one by one, and the great chiefs, Hunting Teepee, Big Dog, Thundercloud, and Medicine Man, and finally Chief Two Eagles was killed. And then the Devil Man left because there were no more Indians to kill. Several days later, the squaws and maidens and the young braves and the boys of the Indian tribes came, and to their horror, they saw the dead bodies of both Devil Men and their own loved ones. Beginning in the canyon, which is now known as Death Canyon, they followed the trail up to the bend, and then up through the steep climb to the top of the mountain, down through the Devil's Staircase, down through the canyon, till they found the last of their warriors and the great chiefs. The wailing was so great and the sorrow was so much for so many days that finally the Great Spirit came down and told them that he would place peaks for the great leadership. The first one on the north was Thundercloud, the medicine man, which was the next to the highest in height, and right close to the great chief. The next one would be Chief Two Eagles, and then Chief Big Dog and Chief Hunting Teepees. A great chasm was created between those two peaks and the high mountain to the west of it, which is known as the altar, now called Table Rock. Now the Indians and the women, the children, the babies, hiked to the top of the altar, and there looked across the great chasm to the great peaks and worshiped the Great Spirit. This went on for many months, and still the great sorrow and the wailing of the people was so great that the Great Spirit came and said, "If one of your number can climb to the highest peak and return safely, the spirits of the four great leaders will be returned." And so the Indians looked about to see who would be the best to go. Finally, a beautiful Indian maiden was selected. She was strong of stature, beautiful, a wonderful maiden. And so, early one August morning at sunrise, she was found starting to climb the side of the mountain. The Indians, as you can well realize, climbed to the top of the altar. From there they could see best as she climbed the mountain. They saw her climbing small precipices. It looked like steep slopes. One place they called the chimney. As she got into it, she put her hands and feet on the sides and worked her way through the chimney to an elevation where she could crawl out and rest. Finally, she got a great way up the peak. She came to an impasse, finding it was a narrow ledge which came around the side of the mountain. It was so narrow she couldn't stand up for fear she would fall off. The other cropping above wasn't high enough for her to stand up if she tried, and so she started crawling on her hands and knees and stomach. She did not dare to stand and look down the precipice, because thousands of feet below was the great glacier, and she didn't want to slide off and fall all that way. So she inched her way along this ledge until she finally was able to get off, straighten up, and start up the last part of her climb. From now on, it was not quite so precarious. Finally, about noontime, when the sun reached the zenith high above, the Indians on the altar saw the Indian maiden fall to her knees, facing east where the Great Spirit was, and thanked him for her safe arrival at the top. She lay there for a short time, a very short time, because she knew that the hardest part of the trip was yet before her. Soon they saw her start coming down the mountain, and then they saw her get herself into the impasse where she couldn't go forward. She retraced her steps, climbed back, and tried another route down. The going was very slow. Near sundown, she came to a cleft in the rocks in the side of the mountain. She was tired and decided, apparently, to spend the night. She would get an early start in the morning and finish her descent to the bottom of the canyon. The Indians, on the morning across the chasm at the altar spent the night there. The next morning at daybreak they scanned the horizon to see where the Indian maiden was. After the sun came up, they were sure she would start the descent. They kept watching, but after spending all day not seeing the Indian maiden, they knew the worst had happened. They decided that during the night she must have fallen asleep from fatigue and fell off and dropped to the great glacier below, where sometime in the future, as the great glacier gradually inches its way to the bottom, this Indian maiden's body would eventually come out. But most of the Indians knew that this was not so. They said that the Great Spirit had come during the night and rescued the Indian maiden. And that is the legend of the Tetons. Thank you.